Hey everybody, it's Corona story time again, and I decided I'm going to read a second section of Forgetting Ourselves on Purpose, Vocation and the Ethics of Ambition by Brian Mahan, which is my all-time favorite book, and I'm reading a section that I talk about all the time, so it's very important to me. I hope you enjoy it. Reawakening Our Epiphanies of Recruitment. It was 1983 and I'd just arrived in town. If you want to understand Boulder, a friend told me, you'll need to make a little pilgrimage to alfalfas. So there I was, a week or so later, gawking my way through this first wave exemplar of a health food supermarket. I'd never seen the likes of it. Meandering through the aisles, I discovered creamy drinks made from beans and wheat and rice, hairy fruits I couldn't name, herds of free-range chicken, meatless sausage, saltless and fatless, soulless, potato chips in colorless pouches. All this and several dozen variations on trail mix to boot. It was a moment fraught with significance. I wasn't at the University of Chicago anymore. Not that the weight of the place had left me quite yet. I still hadn't completed my dissertation on William James, and he accompanied me wherever I went. It wasn't the trail mix or the hairy fruits or the free-range chicken herds, however, that came to symbolize that day for me. It was an advertisement, one of those amateur jobs with the fringe of phone number cutouts at the bottom of a photocopied yellow sheet. That had the honor. Glancing up at the bulletin board on my way out of alfalfas and already slightly dazed from my tour of the place, I read, "Colon massage therapy from a Jungian perspective." I couldn't help but picture what the ad might be adverting to. I also mused as to how colon massage therapy from a Jungian perspective might differ from a Freudian, Marxian, or even a Jamesian perspective. I didn't have a lot to go on. But what was I to make of such a place? First of all, I had to admit that Boulder was impressive in some ways. Who wouldn't be impressed by the confluence of healthy-minded extroversion, easy affluence, spiritual experimentalism, and unparalleled beauty that defined the place? I also had to admit that I was glad to be in Boulder. Frankly, another Chicago winter might have done me in. Still, William James and I were concerned. Was the spiritualized optimism nurtured by 300 days of sunshine each year, echoed majestically by the Flatirons glistening at the edge of town, and legitimated by a surfeit of counselors, healers, spiritual companions, and colon massage therapists, all that it claimed to be? Did people age in Boulder? Were you allowed to get sick without being blamed for it? Where do they hide the fat folks, the old folks, people of color, smokers, Baptists? The more I thought about it, the more I thought that William James would see Boulder as a bastion of healthy-mindedness. He would wonder at the repression of the awareness of the reality of suffering, especially the suffering of those so notably absent from this flourishing community. As impressive as the psychological results of this healthy-minded take on things might be, the optimist's selective and self-interested construction of experience was, for James, a shallow dodge and a mean evasion. I carried my suspicions of Boulder with me into the classroom. I had been invited by Jack Kelso, director of the Farrand Residential Academic Program at CU Boulder, to teach a course on the ethical dimensions of leadership. Accepting his invitation, I set out immediately to argue and inspire my new students into admitting that what they really wanted from life was not what they thought they wanted or said they wanted. They wanted something deeper, something better, something else, something William James and I knew was best for them. This something had to do with compassion and with social responsibility, with vocation. Oddly enough, despite our moralism, despite my woeful inexperience as a teacher, William James and I had a point. The students did seem to desire something deeper, something more idealistic, something different from what they were told constituted success American style. But awaking an exiled shadow government of compassion and idealism is risky business. These young men and women were only too aware of how alienating and constricting were the images of success and failure that the ascendant culture had bequeathed to them. But this knowledge was for many of them accompanied by a sense that they could not afford to look too closely, too systematically at their own sense of alienation. Like Dickie, many of them had already tried to live out their compassion and idealism and failed at it. For their troubles, they had been taught the same lesson Dickie had learned so well. It is not realistic to care too much, to feel too much, even to say too much. Like Martha after her experience at the orphanage, many of these young men and women felt a kind of dull pain at the memory of epiphanies of recruitment now grown cold, and they possessed little sense of what, if anything, to do about it. This was a hard lesson. A former student told me about a particular passage from Douglas Copeland's novel, Life After God. She thought I might want to copy it for class. She said it reminded her a lot of what we'd said about the exiled shadow government of compassion and idealism, and about Dickie's story too. She lent me the book, and I decided I'd read the whole thing and see if the quote jumped out at me. To be honest, I didn't like it very much. It is unremittingly ironic, sometimes tiresomely so. Nonetheless, when I finally arrived at the quote after an hour or so of reading, I was stung by what I read. Copeland took a break from his irony, from his self-preoccupation, from his game, and said the following: "Now, here is my secret. I tell it to you with an openness of heart that I doubt I shall ever achieve again. So I pray that you are in a quiet room as you hear these words. My secret is that I need God, that I am sick and can no longer make it alone. I need God to help me give because I no longer seem to be capable of giving, to help me be kind as I no longer seem capable of kindness, to help me love as I seem beyond being able to love." Copeland's words reminded me of my commitment to teach and write in a certain way, one that downplays my original moralism, one that meets the students where they are rather than where I think they ought to be, one that allows me to admit my own doubts about the possibility of living a different kind of life, even as I take a stand in favor of doing so, one that argues less and listens more and laughs more, one that above all is ever not yet in terms of where it wishes to lead, but is, because of this very fact, somehow already here. Now for the practice. Ask me what I'm living for. Can Dickie recapture his initial resistance to high culture racism? Will Martha be able to respond to her moment of recruitment at the orphanage? What of Douglas Copeland's lost capacity for love and kindness? Is my own wanton decapitation of St. Francis Xavier, missionary to the Indies, an unforgivable act of apostasy? And what about those students who thought Pam was lying about Yale Law School? There's reason to hope for the best. Consider this passage from Robert Cole's delightful and sometimes woundingly beautiful Spiritual Life of Children. The 8-year-old whose epiphany of recruitment Coles records here is young Dorothy Day of Chicago, some 30 years before she found her way to New York's Lower East Side to co-found the Catholic worker movement. I think my pilgrimage began when I was a child, when I was 7 or 8. I'm sitting with my mother, and she's telling me about some trouble in the world, about children like me who don't have enough food. They're dying. I'm eating a donut, I think. I ask my mother why other children don't have donuts and I do. I don't remember her words, but I can still see her face. It's the face of someone who is sad and resigned. Most of all, I remember trying to understand what it meant, me eating a donut, and lots of children with no food at all. I don't remember my words. I just remember holding the donut up and hoping she'd take it and give it to someone, some child. I didn't eat that donut. I put it down on the kitchen table. I asked her if God knew someone nearby, or if he could help us with our modest donut plan. I don't remember asking her that, asking her how we might enlist God in this effort. But she says I kept talking about God and Jesus and feeding the hungry with donuts until she told me please to stop. So, did you ever have a donut plan? What happened to it? Have you thought about trying it again? Thanks for listening. Have a good night.